மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Well, we've seen quite a few move orders in this section of the DVD, quite a few different ideas. We're going to close the section on the exchange variation with what I consider to be an inspiring game. It comes from the FIDE World Championship knockout tournament played in Moscow in 2001 between Belkhodka and long-time exponent of the Alekhine's defence, Rafael Vaganyan. Of course, Vaganyan was one of the strongest players in the world in the 70s, 80s and 90s. And here we see him displaying consummate technique in what looks like a very boring position. I mean, it's pretty clear from a very early stage that Belkhodka is happy with the draw in this game. He sets out his stall very modestly and tries to make a draw. And what is particularly inspiring is the way Vaganyan outplays him from what looks like a completely innocuous position. Anyway, bishop e2 was played, castles, we've seen all this before. Knight comes out to c6, and now white plays a slightly different move to the norm, pawn up to d5. He's hoping to disrupt the natural flow of black's development. Okay, Vaganyan takes on f3, and then plays his knight to e5. And of course white's got to watch out for the c4 pawn in this position, so b3 is about forced. Bishop g5. I think that's another accurate move order. White's basic idea in this variation is to create hassle for black on the long diagonal down to g7. Somehow he'd like to create an attack using this mechanism. So bishop comes out to g5, and black's idea is that when white plays bishop b2 as he does, black's intending to take on f3 and then play his bishop back to f6. And white's already committed his bishop to b2, so white's piece placement is slightly awkward in this particular situation, which gives black time to reorganise the knight on b6, which is his only bad piece. Basically black has equalised already after bishop f6. Okay, rook a e1. Of course this is a rather dry position, and here we see Belkhodka's lack of ambition when he plays the move knight d1. Rook e8, no reason to take on b2 just yet and get another white piece off the back rank. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, queen takes f6, knight takes f6. And around these parts, you know, you would expect both players to be shaking hands. Well, Vaganyan sees no reason to agree to a draw just yet, and the way in which he stirs things up in this position and creates the possibilities to play for a win from what looks like an impossible situation, a very dull and dreary situation, I believe to be very instructive. Now, what are the things about this position that could give any hope for black? There are some signs that black can try to win this game. Firstly, let's take a look at the white pawn structure. It looks strong, but in fact this pawn structure is only strong when there are lots of pieces on the board. You know, it gives impetus to white's possible attack on the long diagonal. Aside from that, the pawn structure is rather rigid, and so black can hope to create hits against the structure, maybe with ideas such as c6, or maybe a5, a4, or maybe even b5. Black's pawn structure is much more elastic than white's. Secondly, white's got to solve the problem of all his pieces on the back rank, particularly that rook on f1. He's got to find a way of bringing that rook on f1 into the game, because as long as that rook on f1 stays where it is, white's king can't enter the fray either. So black's rooks are slightly better placed, you could say, and it's easier for black to bring his king into the fray. They're only little things, but they're elements of a position which a grandmaster can work from. And so, you know, in a position where a lot of players might simply agree to a draw and think nothing of it, Vaganyan plays on, because he knows these small things in the position are going to mitigate in his favour, or he's going to try to make them mitigate in his favour. So anyway, for the time being, white makes a good move. He plays knight c3. Now maybe white's threatening knight b5 in this position, creating hassle, so black stops him with a6. And now once again f3 seems like a pretty decent move. White's going to bring his king into the game. Fair enough. Knight to d7. King to f2. But already that move could possibly be a mistake. In fact, I'm just going to give that a symbol. I don't think that's a good move because it allows black's knight to come to e5. What should white play? Well, just going back, he's got to bring his king into the game somehow, but maybe he should do this via the move g4. And the point is that when black plays knight e5, white's going to play king g2 in this position. And, well, then we'll get a sequence something like this, where the white king has stationed himself outside the range of black's knight, and that enables white to double the rooks on the e-file. I reckon this would probably lead to a kind of equality. Having said that, I wonder whether in this position black has this move, knight to d3. So maybe it's not so easy after all. Maybe black can even draw up chances there. Yeah, well, just an examination of that short variation gives you an idea of how perhaps in this position it's not so easy as it seems for white. However, going back to the game, king f2, knight e5 was definitely not advisable. And now I believe white makes another small imprecision. What he should do, he played rook e3 in the game, which is understandable. He wants to activate that rook on f1. What he should probably play is rook d1. And, yeah, let black make the running now. Okay, I believe this should be a draw somehow. It shouldn't be too difficult for white to make a draw here. But, you know, white's coasting along. He's just expecting a draw to turn up, and it doesn't turn out that way. Because black now starts to go through the gears and play some pretty good moves. So f5 was played. Rook d1, rook e7, h3, perhaps threatening f4. Verganian's not impressed. He plays rook a e8, and now black has the threat of knight to g4 check, winning the exchange. So white's got to beat a retreat. And now pawn up to g5 is an excellent move, in effect cementing the knight on e5, making f4 difficult for white to play. And white plays g3, perhaps renewing the threat of f4. King comes up to f7. Perhaps the next stage is to improve the position of the king, the black king. And here we see the idea mentioned earlier. It is much easier for black to bring his king into the game. Rook comes to c2. h5. Knight e2. And now pawn up to g4. If the knight was strong on e5, it's going to be doubly effective on the outpost at f3. That's the idea behind g4, to create an outpost on f3, which in turn enables the black pieces to get closer to white's king. F takes g4, h takes g4. Perhaps white's pinning his hopes on that outside passed pawn. But there's a long way to go before he's ever going to get to use that pawn. And the black knight comes into f3. So what a transformation over the past 10-15 moves or so, from a very quiet, innocuous looking situation. Black has, to a degree, outplayed his opponent, and now he's established that knight on an incredibly strong, powerful square. Having said that, black's still got to break through, and white hangs tough with rook d3. Rook comes into e4, nothing concrete as yet. Black's just putting on the pressure there by improving the position of his rook, and white can do nothing here, just marching to and fro. Again, black improves the position of his pieces. Micro improvements, keeps the pressure on. That's the way you win games of this type. Okay, a4. Well, perhaps white should have just done nothing. March to and fro with rook c2. But it's very, very difficult to play positions like this where you've got no hope of winning and you are just slightly worse all the way through. The pressure's really on you to defend. I don't like a4. I mean, I think black's next move is excellent. You've got one pawn there, one black pawn freezing two white pawns. This is a really good deal for black. And so a4 is inelastic and just takes away more possibilities from white. So I think that's probably another move where I'm going to criticise Belkhodka's play. At the same time, understanding just how difficult it is to play this position against a technician like Verganian. Well, a5 was played. A5 was played. Knight Will you get the right move on the board? Thank you. Knight comes to c3. White spies a square at b5 for his knight. But will he ever get to use it? Black's rook penetrates to the back rank. And now, of course, you see what Black's threatening all sorts of invasion ideas based upon the move rook h1 and then rook h2. And so White's king is in pretty serious trouble here, which explains the next move, rook to e2. But rook 7 takes e2 was the good move, keeping Black's rook active. And now rook comes across to b1. And in games of this type, it's what remains on the board that counts. It's not just that rook and knight and 6 pawns each is the situation. It's not like that at all. Black's pieces are terribly active, and White has a really hard time keeping a track on Black's activity here. Probably after rook b1, this is a winning position for Black, I would say. Okay, knight comes to f4. Rook comes to b2 check. King comes up to e3. Knight e1. Rook c3, and now another excellent move. Exchanging off White's only active piece. Comes down to a rook ending where Black's got an active rook. White's rook is very passive. So this is a really good idea. Knight takes g2, rook takes g2. I mean, in a game like this, really, you don't need variations. You just need ideas. And we can see here that the black rook is actually towering over White's pathetic rook there. So now it's a question of how you win. White seems to be defending everything. I wonder if you can see how Black breaks through in this position. Well, if king d4 was probably threatening rook e3 and then rook e6 check, Black interrupts that idea completely by playing the excellent move here, f4. And this is the way Vaganyan's going to break in. Creates a square for his king on f5, and then Black's g-pawn is a fantastically strong winning trump. White must take. King comes to f5. It really is quite simple now. c5. White's desperately trying to create some counterplay. King takes f4. C takes d6. For an instant, it looks as though White is breaking through with rook c7, but Black's got it all under control. First, an accurate move, rook d2 check. That forces White's hand. He must go to c3 in view of the rook c4. The king c4, rook c2 check skewer. So king must go to c3. Rook takes d5. Rook takes b7. And now g3. Well, White could resign this position. Play continued for a few more moves. I don't know why, because the writing's on the wall. It's just a simple question of bringing the pieces in. b4, very happy to exchange. A check. Pushing on. And now, in view of Black's idea of rook g4, White resigned. I mean, there's really no future in taking this pawn off and then trying to rush forward. This position is a very easy win for Black. So, an inspiring win by Vaganyan, a win where he seemed to conjure something out of nothing. Black won this game. How did he do it? Well, I think he won it by simply outplaying his opponent. And an inspiring way to finish our section on the exchange variation.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.